as the king and queen leave the thrones and head for the exit of Westminster Abbey on the coronation Saturday, you'll see that everyone bows and curtsies to the king, and no one moves a limb, a muscle, when Camilla passes. And that was because they were angry at Camilla.
King Charles shut down the Garter parade after Camilla pushed Catherine and left her in tears. Okay, take a look at this for a moment. According to the sensational account behind this story, the Garter parade was thrown into chaos after an alleged confrontation between Queen Camilla and Catherine, Princess of Wales, reportedly left Catherine in tears and forced King Charles to confront a decision no monarch wants to make in front of the world. This was not simply a disagreement between two members of the royal family. The allegation is that something happened behind the scenes so serious that the king had to question whether the ceremony could continue as planned. And the deeper question is, what happened in those few moments before Catherine was left visibly shaken? Now, watch this carefully. The reason this account has attracted so much attention is not simply the alleged physical confrontation. It is what reportedly happened immediately afterward. Charles was allegedly told that Catherine had been left distressed, while competing accounts began circulating about exactly what had taken place. One side reportedly attempted to minimize the encounter. Another account suggested that Catherine had been deliberately pushed aside during preparations for the Garter parade. And suddenly,
This, of course, came as a huge shock. And William and I have been doing everything we can to process and manage this privately.
King was no longer dealing with an ordinary family disagreement. He was dealing with a situation that could become visible to thousands of people and countless cameras. Okay, stay with this, because the most important part of the story is not what happened after the parade was interrupted. It is what allegedly happened just before that decision was made. The account suggests that senior aides were pulled into the situation, staff were asked to clarify what they had witnessed, and Charles wanted to know why Catherine had been left in tears. The ceremony was approaching, the royal household was preparing for the public appearance, and the possibility of a family confrontation spilling into a major ceremonial occasion suddenly became impossible to ignore. Hi viewers, if you believe Catherine should never have been put in that position, would you have spoken up for her? Just comment yes if you think Charles was right to step in. And if you think moments like this should not simply be brushed aside because the people involved are royal, subscribe, like this video, and share it with someone who follows the royal family. Staying silent costs nothing, but sometimes silence is exactly what allows a situation to continue. The atmosphere around the ceremony was already changing. What should have been a carefully controlled royal appearance was now carrying another kind of tension. Catherine had reportedly been expected to take her place as planned. Camilla was also preparing for the event. Staff were moving between their positions, checking arrangements, and attempting to keep the ceremony running smoothly. Yet behind the polished surface, the alleged confrontation had created a problem that could not be solved simply by smiling for the cameras. And this is where the story becomes difficult to dismiss as a simple clash of personalities. The allegation is that Catherine was not merely upset because of harsh words. The account describes an encounter in which Camilla allegedly pushed Catherine, leaving her shaken and in tears. That claim remains disputed, but within the story it becomes the turning point. Because once Catherine was reportedly left distressed, the question changed from who was right to what Charles was prepared to do about it. The king was allegedly given the first explanation while preparations were still underway. It was not enough. He wanted the sequence reconstructed. Who had been present? Who had seen the encounter? What had happened immediately before it? What had been said afterward? And why were different people apparently describing the incident in different ways? Those questions matter because royal ceremonies depend on precision. Every movement is planned. Every position has a purpose. Every public appearance is surrounded by people whose job is to prevent disorder from becoming visible. A disagreement can be contained. A misunderstanding can be corrected. But once a member of the royal family is reportedly left in tears shortly before a major public procession, containment becomes much harder. The alleged confrontation also carried another problem. Catherine was not just another member of the family standing in the background. Her presence at major royal events attracts enormous public attention. Any visible sign that she had been upset could immediately become part of the story. A glance caught by a camera could become a headline. A change in position could become a theory. A delayed appearance could trigger questions. And if the parade itself appeared to stop because of something involving Catherine and Camilla, the monarchy would have an entirely different crisis on its hands. Charles therefore faced a choice that had no comfortable answer. Allow the ceremony to continue
privately for the sake of our young family. As you can imagine, this has taken time. It has taken me time to recover from it.
And risk appearing to ignore what had allegedly happened to Catherine, or intervene and risk exposing a private family dispute in front of the very public the royal household had spent hours preparing to impress. That is the pressure sitting at the center of this account. And there was another detail that reportedly made the situation even more uncomfortable. Camilla's advisors were said to dispute the version of events being presented to the king. That meant Charles was no longer hearing one clean explanation. He was hearing competing versions, each carrying consequences for the people involved. Catherine's reported distress made the situation emotional. The conflicting accounts made it political. Because once advisors become involved, the argument is no longer happening only between two people. It becomes a battle over whose version of events will become the official version. And Charles knew that whichever decision he made could expose the family to another wave of scrutiny. The king reportedly ordered palace officials to look more closely at what had happened. Staff accounts became important. The surrounding arrangements became important. The exact sequence of movements became important. Even the moments that had appeared insignificant earlier could suddenly become evidence capable of changing the entire interpretation of the confrontation. Meanwhile, the clock was moving. The Garter parade was not an ordinary family gathering that could simply be postponed without consequence. It was a highly visible royal ceremony surrounded by tradition, ceremony, and public expectation. People were waiting. Officials were preparing.
So angry. It was anger, and I thought, why is this? Well, it was sort of boy. I thought it was an old man, was probably not a great deal older than me, but and I think...
Cameras were ready, and somewhere inside that machinery, a decision was taking shape. The most dangerous possibility was no longer that Camilla and Catherine had argued. It was that the alleged confrontation could not be hidden before the public procession began. Because if Catherine appeared in front of the cameras after reportedly being left in tears, viewers would notice. If Camilla appeared beside her, viewers would watch their faces. And if Charles suddenly changed the arrangements, people would immediately ask why. That left the king facing a brutal choice: protect the ceremony or protect the person who had allegedly been hurt. And according to the account, Charles chose to find out exactly what had happened before allowing the royal event to move forward. But the answer he was about to receive would reportedly make the situation far worse than a family disagreement. And if you think the tears were the worst part, stay here, because the next part reveals what Charles was allegedly told just before the parade was brought to a halt. The first warning did not come from the king. It came from the people trying to keep the ceremony moving. According to the account, the tension around Catherine had been building before the public attention shifted toward the Garter parade. Staff were working through the ceremonial arrangements when the relationship between Catherine and Camilla allegedly became the problem nobody in the room wanted to name. There was no crowd watching, no television audience waiting for a royal reaction, just a small group of people trying to understand why the atmosphere had suddenly changed. The important question was not whether two royal women could disagree. They obviously could. The question was whether the disagreement had crossed a line. That distinction matters because the Garter parade is built around order. People know where they are expected to stand, They know when they move. They know who follows whom. Even small changes can affect the appearance of the entire procession. So when an alleged dispute involves one of the most watched members of the royal family, a simple disagreement can become a ceremonial problem very quickly. The account claims Catherine had been preparing to take her expected place when the encounter with Camilla became heated. What happened next is disputed. The allegation is that Camilla pushed Catherine. Other interpretations could describe the contact differently, which is why the exact sequence matters. But the reported result is clear within this account. Catherine was left distressed, and the people around her were forced to react.
I know she will bring to the demands of her new role the steadfast devotion to duty on which I have come to rely so much.
One detail separates this story from an ordinary royal disagreement. Catherine allegedly did not immediately turn the incident into a public confrontation. Instead, the people around her had to decide what to do while the event was still approaching. That put staff in an uncomfortable position. They could not simply treat the matter as private if Catherine's condition affected the ceremony. At the same time, they could not publicly explain an allegation that had not yet been established. That is where the pressure began to move upward. People close to the situation were reportedly asked to account for what they had seen. Who was standing nearby? What happened immediately before the alleged push? Was there an exchange of words? Did anyone intervene? Did Catherine react before leaving the area? Those questions sound simple, but each answer could change the meaning of the incident. A witness saying the contact was accidental would create one story. A witness saying the confrontation was deliberate would create another. A witness saying the disagreement had been developing for some time would create a third. And the palace could not afford to treat all three versions as though they carried the same weight. The account suggests that Catherine's reaction became particularly important because the alleged incident was not followed by an immediate public explanation. That silence created room for competing interpretations. When a royal family member appears upset, people look for a reason. When the reason is not given, speculation fills the space. That was precisely the danger facing Charles. He was not simply deciding whether his wife and daughter-in-law had argued. He was deciding whether the disagreement had reached the point where it could damage the appearance of unity during a major royal ceremony. There was another complication. Camilla's advisors reportedly challenged aspects of the account being presented to the king. That meant the dispute was no longer limited to what Catherine said she experienced. It became a question of competing testimony. One side could insist the incident had been exaggerated. Another could argue that Catherine had been treated unfairly. Staff could remember different parts of the same confrontation, and Charles had to determine which details could be trusted. This is the point where the story begins to resemble the competitor's strongest structure. The visible confrontation is only the surface. The real tension comes from what happens when people start comparing notes. The more questions officials asked, the more important the timing became. What happened before Catherine was allegedly pushed? Who was close enough to see it? Who spoke to Catherine afterward? Who spoke to Camilla? And why did the accounts reportedly begin to diverge? Those questions pushed the situation toward a decision that neither side could easily control. The king could have treated the matter as a private disagreement and allowed the ceremony to continue. That would preserve appearances, at least temporarily. But if Catherine appeared visibly affected, the cameras could expose the tension anyway. He could also intervene. That would protect Catherine from being placed immediately back into an uncomfortable situation, but it would create another problem. Any unusual change involving the Garter parade could attract attention. If the procession was delayed, altered, or stopped, the public would want an explanation. The monarchy would then face the very thing royal households usually work hardest to prevent: a private dispute becoming a public event. And according to the account, Charles began asking questions that suggested he was not prepared to accept the first explanation offered to him. That mattered because the next stage was no longer about hurt feelings, it was about evidence. The staff accounts were reportedly being examined against the sequence of events. The surrounding arrangements were being questioned. The people who had been closest to the confrontation suddenly had greater importance than the senior figures who normally controlled the public narrative. Catherine's position also became more delicate. If she withdrew, people might ask why. If she continued as though nothing had happened, the emotional cost could remain hidden while the ceremony proceeded. If she confronted Camilla publicly, the family dispute could explode in front of cameras. There was no clean option. The timing also made the situation more dangerous. Every minute brought the public ceremony closer. Staff could continue preparing the route, but they could not prepare a solution to a family dispute that was still being contested. The longer the uncertainty lasted, the greater the chance that someone would make a visible mistake. A delayed appearance, a changed position, or a single expression caught by a camera could reveal more than any official statement ever could. And once the cameras noticed, controlling the story would become almost impossible. The king therefore had very little time left to separate fact from rumor, protect Catherine, and decide whether tradition mattered more than what had just happened inside. That is why the next detail matters. The account suggests that Charles was not only told that Catherine had been left in tears, he was reportedly given information about what had happened immediately before the confrontation, and that information allegedly forced him to reconsider whether the ceremony should proceed normally. Until that point, the king could still tell himself that the situation was manageable. After that point, the calculation changed. Because if the sequence being described to him was accurate, then the alleged push was not the entire story. It was the visible end of a dispute that had already developed behind the scenes. And that raised the question nobody wanted to answer aloud. Was Catherine simply caught in a tense moment, or had somebody deliberately tried to change her place within the ceremony? The answer would determine what Charles did next. For everyone watching from outside, the Garter parade still looked like a royal tradition waiting to begin. Inside, according to the account, the king was facing a completely different reality. The next move would put his authority directly against the competing versions of what happened, and once that decision was made, the ceremony itself would become part of the confrontation. If Catherine deserved to be heard, refusing to look away is the least the audience can do. So stay with this story, because the next part is where Charles allegedly discovers the detail that makes the entire dispute far more serious. The decision was now sitting on Charles's desk, and the next question was no longer whether Catherine had been upset. It was why. According to the account, the king wanted the sequence reconstructed before the Garter parade could move forward. The people around him were no longer dealing with a private disagreement that could be dismissed with a few quiet words. They were trying to establish what happened, who saw it, and whether the incident had consequences for the ceremony itself. The first difficulty was the conflicting accounts. One version reportedly suggested that the encounter had been overstated. Another treated Catherine's reaction as evidence that something more serious had happened. Between those positions were the staff members who had allegedly witnessed parts of the exchange but did not necessarily see everything from the same angle. That difference became crucial. A royal household can manage a disagreement when everyone agrees on what happened. It becomes much harder when several people remember the same moment differently. Every missing detail creates another question. Every contradiction creates another reason to look closer. Charles was reportedly not satisfied with a simple explanation. He wanted to know what happened immediately before the alleged physical contact. He wanted to know whether words had been exchanged. He wanted to know who was close enough to hear them. Most importantly, he wanted to know why Catherine had been left so visibly distressed while the ceremony was still approaching. That last point carried the greatest weight. If the encounter had been harmless, why had Catherine reacted so strongly? If it had been deliberate, who had allowed the situation to reach that point? And if the disagreement had been building before anyone noticed, why had nobody stepped in earlier? The questions were beginning to point in the same direction. Something had happened before the tears. That was the detail Charles needed. The account suggests that officials began reviewing the circumstances around the confrontation, including the arrangements surrounding the Garter parade. This mattered because positioning at a major royal ceremony is not random. People are placed according to protocol, visibility, rank, movement, and the requirements of the event. A change that looks insignificant to someone watching from a distance can mean something very different to the people responsible for the ceremony. That possibility raised the stakes. If Catherine had simply become involved in an argument, the matter could potentially be contained. If her position had been challenged before the confrontation, then the incident had a different character. It could suggest that the disagreement was connected to how the two women were expected to appear beside one another during the ceremony. The account does not establish that this was the motive. It presents it as part of the disputed explanation surrounding the incident. But the possibility was enough to make the situation more serious, because the Garter parade was not happening in a private room. It was about to happen in front of cameras. Every person standing in that procession would be seen. Every change in position could be noticed. Every gap between family members could become a talking point. That meant Charles was facing a problem with two separate layers. There was the personal issue involving Catherine and Camilla. Then there was the institutional problem of what the public would see if that personal issue followed them into the parade. The king could not solve one without considering the other. According to the account, Charles therefore had to decide whether to preserve the appearance of normality or stop the situation from becoming more damaging. Neither option was safe. Allowing Catherine to continue could make it appear that her distress had been ignored. Changing the arrangement could make the public wonder why. Stopping the ceremony could create an even bigger spectacle. And allowing Camilla's advisors to control the explanation could leave the king making a decision without confidence in the facts. This was the point where the alleged disagreement became a test of authority. Charles was not only listening to Catherine's side, he was also hearing the defense from Camilla's camp. That placed him in an uncomfortable position. Whatever he decided would affect both his wife and his daughter-in-law, and any visible intervention could be interpreted as choosing one side against the other. But there was another concern. If the parade continued and something else happened between the two women, Charles could no longer claim he had been unaware of the tension. He had already been told Catherine was distressed. He had already heard competing explanations. He now had to decide what level of risk he was willing to accept in public. That is where the account says the situation changed. The king reportedly asked for the events to be examined before the procession proceeded. Instead of treating the confrontation as finished, he wanted the surrounding circumstances understood. And then came the detail that allegedly changed his calculation. The issue was not simply that Catherine had been upset. The account suggests there was a concern that the confrontation may have affected the planned presentation of the royal family during the ceremony. That possibility was explosive, because if someone had intentionally tried to alter Catherine's place, visibility, or relationship to the people around her, then the incident was no longer merely emotional. It was about control, and control is where royal disputes become dangerous. Catherine did not need to make a public accusation for the situation to escalate. The alleged incident had already created questions among the people responsible for the event. Charles only needed to believe that something had gone wrong, badly enough to justify intervention. The pressure was now moving toward the ceremony itself. Outside, preparations continued. Inside, the king was reportedly weighing a decision that could expose the family conflict to everyone waiting beyond the palace walls. The crucial moment had arrived. Charles could still allow the Garter parade to proceed, but according to the account, he was no longer willing to do so simply because tradition demanded it. He wanted the situation dealt with first, and once that decision began moving through the royal household, the people waiting for the parade were about to witness something they had not expected to see. The ceremony was no longer the priority. the confrontation was. The account also places importance on the people standing around the royal family at that moment. They were not spectators, they were witnesses, and their actions could determine how the incident was understood later. A staff member who looked away might remember only the aftermath. Someone closer to Catherine might have noticed her expression before she left. Another person might have heard words that changed the meaning of the contact completely. That is why the king reportedly wanted more than a single explanation. He needed the sequence. First, what brought Catherine and Camilla into the same moment? Second, what was said? Third, what physical movement followed? And finally, why did Catherine emerge from the encounter in tears? Until those questions were answered, Charles could not know whether he was dealing with a misunderstanding, a serious breach of conduct, or a dispute that had been building underneath the ceremony for much longer. The clock was moving. Every minute brought the procession closer, and with every minute, the cost of making the wrong decision became higher. If Charles stopped the event, the world would ask why. If he allowed it to continue, the world might see the consequences on Catherine's face. There was no option left. Charles had to choose. If you think Catherine should not have been expected to simply smile and carry on after an alleged incident like this, make your voice count with a like and share this story. Because the next part is where Charles's private decision reportedly becomes a public disruption. The order finally came through. According to the account, the Garter parade was no longer being treated as a ceremony that could simply continue while the family dealt with its problems in private. Charles had reportedly decided that the situation surrounding Catherine needed attention before the royal procession moved ahead. That decision changed the atmosphere immediately. Staff who had been preparing for a routine ceremonial appearance were now working around an unresolved family dispute. The people waiting outside Windsor had no idea why the timing was shifting. They could see movement among officials, but they could not see the argument that had created it. That was precisely what made the next few minutes so dangerous. The royal family was expected to appear in a carefully controlled sequence. Every person involved had a place. Every movement was meant to look effortless. Nothing about the ceremony was supposed to suggest uncertainty, but uncertainty was now the only thing the people behind the scenes could not eliminate. Catherine was still carrying the emotional impact of the alleged confrontation. Camilla was facing competing accounts of what had happened. Charles was being forced to decide how much authority he was willing to use to prevent the dispute from becoming visible. Then, the situation moved from private concern to public action. The account claims the king ordered officials to hold the parade while the circumstances were addressed. For a royal ceremony, that is not a small adjustment. A delay can be explained. A change in timing can be blamed on logistics. But when an event associated with centuries of tradition appears to stop because something has gone wrong inside the royal family, people notice. The crowd notices first. Then the cameras notice. Then the headlines begin writing themselves. And the longer the pause continues, the harder it becomes to pretend nothing unusual has happened. That was the position Charles was reportedly facing. The decision placed the king directly in the middle of the dispute. If the parade resumed without explanation, Catherine's supporters could interpret that as a failure to protect her. If it remained suspended, the interruption itself could become evidence that something serious had occurred. Camilla's position became even more uncomfortable. Her advisors had reportedly challenged parts of the account given to Charles. Now the king's decision had created a visible consequence before those disagreements had been completely settled. The question became simple. Why had Charles stopped the event? Nobody outside the inner circle could answer it with certainty. That uncertainty created a vacuum, and royal controversies never leave a vacuum empty for long. People began watching every movement. They watched the officials. They watched the royal entrance. They watched for Catherine. They watched for Camilla. And most importantly, they watched the king's reaction. The account presents this as the moment when the private dispute became impossible to contain. The alleged confrontation had started with two members of the family. It had moved through staff discussions, competing explanations, and questions about what happened. Now it was affecting a public ceremony. That changed the stakes completely. Catherine's reported tears were no longer only a private emotional reaction. They had become part of a larger question about whether she had been treated appropriately inside the royal household. Camilla's alleged conduct was no longer being judged only as a personal matter. It was being examined through the consequences it had created, and Charles was no longer simply a husband deciding how to respond to a family disagreement. He was the monarch deciding whether the institution could continue as though nothing had happened. That distinction explains why the account gives so much importance to the king's intervention. The decision was not portrayed as an emotional outburst. It was presented as a deliberate attempt to prevent the situation from escalating in front of the public. Yet there was an obvious problem. Stopping the parade did not make the questions disappear. It made them louder. People wanted to know what had happened to Catherine. They wanted to know why the ceremony had been disrupted. They wanted to know whether Camilla had been involved. And they wanted to know why Charles had apparently considered the situation serious enough to interfere with the event itself. Inside the royal household, the pressure was now running in the opposite direction. The staff needed clarity, the family needed control, the public needed an explanation, and the people responsible for managing the ceremony needed to know when or whether they were supposed to proceed. That is where the account introduces its most important tension. The king had allegedly been given conflicting explanations, but the parade could not remain suspended indefinitely. At some point, someone would have to make the next move. If Catherine appeared, cameras would search her face. If Camilla appeared, cameras would search hers. If both appeared together, every interaction would be examined. And if one of them was absent, that absence would become its own story. There was no way back to complete normality. The alleged incident had already changed what everyone would be watching for. Catherine's supporters would be looking for signs that Charles had protected her. Camilla's supporters would be looking for evidence that the accusation against her had been exaggerated. The palace would be trying to avoid making either side look victorious. That is why the next stage mattered so much. The ceremony could only resume if the people responsible believed the situation was under control. But control was becoming harder to maintain. The account suggests that Charles wanted the matter clarified before allowing the royal appearance to proceed normally. That placed enormous pressure on those who had witnessed the earlier encounter. Their recollections could determine what happened next. A single detail could make the alleged confrontation look accidental. Another could make it look deliberate. One statement could weaken the accusation. Another could strengthen it. And while those details were being weighed, Catherine remained at the center of a controversy she had reportedly never intended to create. The public, meanwhile, was waiting. The crowd had come to see tradition. Instead, it was about to see the consequences of a family dispute. The king had already made the first move by refusing to treat the situation as insignificant. Now he had to decide what came after the pause. Would the parade resume? Would Catherine appear beside the other senior royals? Would Camilla continue as planned? Or would Charles take an even more dramatic step? According to the account, the answer would become visible before the public ever received a complete explanation. And that is what made the next moment so explosive. The parade was not simply delayed anymore. The royal family was being forced to confront the consequences of what had allegedly happened before thousands of people watching from outside. There was also a practical danger that could not be ignored. Once the procession was visibly disrupted, officials could no longer guarantee that the public would accept a routine explanation. Cameras were already positioned. Phones were already raised. Every second of hesitation increased the chance that an unexplained royal dispute would become the dominant image of the day. For Charles, that meant the next instruction had to be precise. There could be no confusion about whether the pause was temporary, whether the family would continue together, or whether someone would be removed from the planned arrangement. The king had created the pause. Now everyone was waiting to see whom he would protect and what he was prepared to sacrifice to do it. The answer was moving through Windsor. If standing up for Catherine matters to you, do not just watch this part and move on. Like, share, and stay with the story, because the next decision is where this private dispute allegedly turns into the moment that nobody at Windsor can hide. The room had gone quiet, but the controversy was only beginning. According to the account, the crucial question after the alleged confrontation was no longer whether Catherine had been upset. It was whether the king believed the explanation being given to him. That distinction mattered because a family disagreement could be contained. A disputed account involving a major royal ceremony was much harder to contain once Charles had become personally involved. The competing versions now carried consequences. If the incident had been accidental, the disruption surrounding the parade could look excessive. If the alleged push had been deliberate, allowing everything to continue normally could look like the king had ignored Catherine's treatment. Charles therefore had to separate emotion from evidence before deciding what the palace would do next. The account says officials continued examining what had happened and comparing the different descriptions of the encounter. The focus was not only on the alleged contact itself, it was on the sequence around it. What brought the women into that moment? What had been said? Who was present? What did Catherine do immediately afterward? And why had the disagreement become serious enough to threaten the ceremony? The Garter parade had become a test of whether the royal household could maintain public unity after an alleged private rupture. Charles could protect the ceremony's appearance, or he could acknowledge that something had gone wrong and accept the attention that followed. If she returned to the ceremony without any visible change, the public might assume nothing serious had happened. If she appeared shaken, cameras could turn her expression into the day's defining image. If she stayed away, the absence would invite even more questions. There was no perfect solution. The same problem applied to Camilla. Her advisors could challenge the allegation, but every defense risked drawing more attention to the confrontation. Silence could be interpreted as guilt by some viewers. A strong denial could make the dispute larger. Charles therefore had to manage two battles at once. The first was inside his family, the second was outside it, where thousands of people were prepared to interpret every movement. This is why the alleged decision to interrupt the Garter parade matters beyond the argument itself. It suggested that the king was prepared to place the immediate stability of the royal family ahead of the appearance of uninterrupted tradition. And that carries a cost. A monarch can stop a ceremony, but cannot stop the questions that follow. By this stage, the public would want to know why the procession had been affected. Royal watchers would compare photographs and video. Commentators would examine expressions, positions, and timing. Every unexplained pause would become another piece of speculation. The palace would then face the familiar problem of royal controversy. Say too little, and the rumors grow. Say too much, and a private family matter becomes an official dispute. According to the account, the deeper issue was therefore not simply Camilla and Catherine, because royal power is rarely measured by who speaks the loudest. It is measured by who can make a decision when everyone else wants the problem to disappear. Charles was now in that position. If the account is accurate, he had already crossed the line from private husband and father to monarch responsible for the conduct surrounding a major ceremonial event. Whatever happened next would therefore have consequences beyond one afternoon. Catherine's reported tears became the emotional center of the controversy because they represented something the palace could not easily control. A royal family can choreograph entrances, appearances, and ceremonial movement. It cannot fully choreograph an authentic emotional reaction. That is why the image of Catherine allegedly being left in tears became so powerful within the story. Instead of asking which royal woman had greater status, people would ask why Catherine had been placed in that position at all. It turns a personality dispute into a question of treatment. The account suggests that Charles ultimately chose intervention rather than pretending the dispute had not happened. The parade's disruption therefore becomes the visible consequence of a private decision. But the consequences did not end when the ceremony was brought under control. Inside the family, relationships would have to absorb what had happened. Catherine would have to decide how much confidence she could place in future encounters. Camilla would have to deal with the fact that her advisor's defense had not erased the controversy. Charles would have to consider how future ceremonies could prevent another dispute from reaching the same point. That is where the story's power really lies. A public ceremony can last for a few hours, a family dispute can last for years, and an allegation that reaches the center of the monarchy can change how every future interaction is interpreted. There is also an important distinction between what is alleged and what is established. The account describes the confrontation, the tears, and the king's intervention as part of a dramatic royal dispute, but those details should not be treated as independently verified facts. They remain claims within the story unless reliable evidence confirms them. That distinction does not make the questions disappear. It makes them more important. What happened between Camilla and Catherine? Why did their encounter reportedly become so serious? Why did competing accounts emerge? And why, according to the story, was Charles prepared to disrupt a major royal ceremony rather than simply allow the family to continue smiling for the cameras? Those are the questions that keep the controversy alive. For Catherine, the lasting issue is not whether one parade was interrupted. It is whether the people around her recognized the seriousness of what she had allegedly experienced. For Charles, the issue is whether his intervention was the right balance between family loyalty and institutional responsibility. For Camilla, the controversy raises a different question. If the allegations are wrong, how does she overcome a story that has already shaped public suspicion? And if parts of the account are accurate, what does that mean for the balance of influence inside the family? Those questions cannot be answered by one photograph or one public appearance. They require the sequence. They require the competing accounts. And they require separating what people claim happened from what can actually be established. That is why this story does not really end with the parade. The more interesting part is what the alleged confrontation reveals about a royal family under pressure. The public sees robes, ceremonies, and carefully controlled appearances. Behind those images are relationships, rivalries, loyalties, and decisions that rarely receive the same level of attention. If Charles truly believed Catherine had been treated unfairly, his response would represent more than a moment of anger. It would show where he was prepared to draw a line. And if the allegation is wrong, the story raises an equally serious question about how quickly an unverified royal rumor can become a public narrative. Either way, the controversy survives because the central question remains unresolved. Was this simply a confrontation that spiraled out of control, or was it a warning sign of a deeper struggle over Catherine's place, Camilla's influence, and Charles's authority? That is the question the palace would have to confront after the cameras moved away. And for viewers, it is the detail worth remembering. The Garter parade was supposed to display unity. Instead, according to this account, it became the stage for a dispute about loyalty, authority, and who would be protected when the royal family's polished image began to crack. The ceremony could recover its schedule, but the trust inside the family could not be restored by returning everyone to their assigned places and asking the cameras to keep rolling. If you believe Catherine deserved to be heard, rather than simply expected to smile and move on, do not let the story disappear into silence. Like this video, share it with someone who follows the royal family. Subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications, because the next story coming to this channel goes even deeper, and doing nothing while these controversies are buried is exactly how the same questions keep coming back.